in your mind, what were like the top 3 reasons that Russia's military seemed to underperform everybody's expectations? What do you think went wrong?
Training.
Okay.
Those are the top 3 reasons. Russia has always been able to kind of bully its way into a situation, almost like a drunken boxer, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're going to roll in. Look, I am not a prize fighter, right? But if I had to fight Mike Tyson, he's going to knock my head off, right? I might be able to outrun him. I might be able to bob and weave a little bit. This guy's going to floor me, right? Mm-hmm. So Russia might be like this drunken boxer. It's just rolling in, and it's going to smash a bunch of stuff, and eventually they're going to smash right through. But one of their big issues is that training is expensive. It's expensive.
Right.
And Russia used to have a mostly conscript army that's led by professional officers. And now they have kind of this hybrid army. They have some conscripts, and they have a lot of kontraktniki, which are contractors. Like, there are people who sign a contract. Now, so that one of the issues is that they don't do enough actual training in tasks that they need to succeed on the battlefield.
Is that because of like the contractor nature relationship of most of their hires?
It's expensive.
Okay.
Well, you got to pay for fuel, you got to pay for ammunition.
Actually, I want to ask a question particularly in that. So some of the flexibility you're granted with things like the Wagner Group is you can do things without having your fingers on them.
Yeah.
Do you think that it significantly hampered Russia's ability to conduct war when it feels like, and this is, I think this is the case, but maybe it's not, you can tell me, it feels like the people with the most experience doing Russian military operations weren't actually the Russia proper military. It was like people like the Wagner Group that operated foreignly so much. Do you think that hurt their ability to conduct that war, that their most experienced people were there? Or do you think my perception is wrong on that? Or
No, because that's an excellent question. And Wagner, so kind of the difference, Wagner had some vehicles, but what Wagner had that the Russian military didn't have was a clear, I would say, non-commissioned officer leadership structure, even though it was a corporate structure. So one of the advantages that the West has with a lot of military engagements is guys like me. I'm a former platoon sergeant and a former first sergeant as well. So I often call myself, I am the Burger King drive-through manager. So if you think of an Army platoon as a Burger King, right? The lieutenant is the general manager, right? And I'm the drive-through manager. And if the lieutenant has to go home, if the Burger King manager has to go home because his kid is sick, I can close the store. Mm-hmm. I know how to do that, right? So in a lot of Western armies, you have this professional corps of non-commissioned officers, these sergeants, right? And these sergeants have a lot of experience. In order to get where I got as a sergeant first class and later as a first sergeant, I had to go to multiple schools, which cost money and are weeks long, months long in some cases. Right? One of the schools was telling him about last night. It was called your producer. They actually called it Mancock. Maneuver Advanced Non-Commissioned Officers Course.
Ain't no way.
Wow, you guys are so Christian, you don't even know how bad that sounds. But yeah, it was Maneuver ANOC. So this was an advanced, they call it something else now. But I had to go to this school, and this school is months long, and you're doing graduate level work, writing papers and stuff like that. Well, Russia doesn't really have a system like that to advance their non-commissioned officers. And the whole idea is that Russia was centered around a mechanized-centric system. All right? Almost everything Russia does is mechanized. They're always near their armored fighting vehicles, either the BMPs, BTRs, whatever. And the advantage of that is, like, look, if you're never going more than 300 meters away from your vehicle, you really don't need those mid-level Burger King managers, those NCOs, to lead the maneuver element. Right? You're not going that far away. But if you're doing light infantry, you kind of need that. So what did Wagner do? Wagner did a lot of light infantry stuff. Did a lot of assaults, light infantry. And they had people who had experience just by being mercenaries who could act as those NCOs. I think that's one of the reasons that Wagner was so successful, is they had people who had served as mercenaries who had experience and were allowed to lead small groups of people. Mm-hmm. Whereas in the Russian military, when your lieutenant gets killed, what do we do now? I don't know.
Yeah.
I guess we surrender. I mean, we go back. I don't know. Who's supposed to tell us to do what?
One of the we spoke about this a little bit last night, but looking at playing a lot of DayZ video game. Arma 2 people play as well, and then playing a lot of Eve. It's funny when you look at the military stuff how much of a crossover there is between how you conduct like warfare in these games versus the real world, where things like communication structures and everything are vitally important. And if these things have a breakdown, or if you can't coordinate, it doesn't matter how many people you have, it doesn't matter how effective the weapons are, you're like fighting in the dark. And it's funny sometimes to see the difference in or the similarities, I guess, in military operations versus how some of these games work.
Absolutely. If every snake needs a head, right? Like you need that brain to say, hey, this is what we're going to be doing.
So you think that so Wagner did a lot of that light infantry movement, a lot of smaller scale
They had
stuff.
some tanks and armored personnel carriers, but yeah.
Okay, so then training. Dig one level deeper. Do you think Russia didn't train its troops because of arrogance, because of, some people will point to communist corruption where they thought they were better than they were? Some people point to lack of money to replace the tires on their Jeeps or the treads of their tanks.
Money.
You think it's money?
It's money, and there might be some corruption there. Like, hey, we gave you... Look, the Russian army doesn't even have socks. All right? They use this thing called portyanki, which are these... Think of them as handkerchiefs. You take this handkerchief and you put it down by your foot, and you fold one side over the other side, and then you lift the toe up, and you wrap the rest around your ankle. And actually, learning how to tie portyanki was like a rite of passage in Russia. You know, that they
still, that's what they use?
still use this stuff. Now, in some ways, it's a feature, not a bug, because now you don't have to create 3 different sizes of socks. You just give them one handkerchief, right? And if they need to dry their portyanki out, they just put it on their shoulders. They can walk. It's just a piece of cloth that'll dry, fairly quickly.
Right.
So in some ways, it's a very Soviet solution, right? Well, we don't have the technology to make socks. Socks are expensive. We don't want to carry 3 sizes because of logistics. Let's just give everybody cloths.
Kind of cheap, quick, and fast.
Cheap, quick, and fast. And it works. Mostly, right? I mean, if you don't tie your portyanki correctly, you get blisters and all that as well. But so if you're some Russian officer and you've been given $1 million for this year to train your troops, you might say to yourself, you know what? Our troops really aren't going to be doing that much fighting, so let me put some toward this dacha. We'll have one exercise. It'll be pre-scripted. We'll give each guy 10 rounds. They'll go through the motions, and then everybody, nobody's none the wiser, right?
Okay, I can understand. So here's what I'm trying to figure out. I understand what you're saying in terms of this might explain why they have the lack of capabilities, but what I'm really curious about is why didn't they understand that? So for instance, if you might know, well, we don't train enough, we don't have the money for this, why would you act in a way that seems to betray that you didn't realize it? Like because the rolling tanks on the first day. Okay, gotcha.
It worked in South Ossetia, in Georgia.
It was like an arrogance, like they thought it would be enough, sufficient.
It always worked before.
Although Georgia versus Ukraine though is
well, in Chechnya, was it 93? These guys they rolled into Grozny.
Jesus.
They got schwacked, and they consolidated, reorganized, and crap, what the hell happened to us? And they just rolled in, just destroyed every single freaking building. They knew how to do that, right? And they did it again in South Ossetia in Georgia back in 2008, I believe it was.
And Abkhazia, I think, as well. There's a second territory.
Hey, this is working, right? Why not keep doing it? So I think that's kind of it always worked before until one day it didn't.
Do you think there's going to be like a military revolution in Russia as a result of Ukraine? Everyone, again, I'm going to speak from a super lay person because you both know a lot more than even I do. But even as a lay person, I was pretty much told that Ukraine was doomed. They were going to be rolled over across the entire country in 3 days, and it was going to be over. And here we are, years later. And so, well, not years, but more than 3 days.
I think in an all-out war,
it's not what anyone expected.
It feels like Russia could defeat Ukraine in an all-out war, but there's an interesting dynamic where Ukraine is fighting for its life, and Russia's not really allowed to tell its population that it's actually fighting. In that it seems like, and every person in Ukraine is like, we're on the eve of destruction or annihilation, and we have to fight for everything. And Russia can't mobilize the population would like to, because it is playing this dual role of like, we're doing a special military operation in Ukraine, so we're not going to mobilize all you guys because it's not that big of a deal.
Nazi language, like we're freeing them from Nazis and stuff.
Well, no, it's not so much that. It's that I don't think that Russia's not allowed to tell this population, guys, we've got to start drafting and go full-scale war because Putin will lose all support. So you can only conscript a small portion of the population. You can't do a full-scale mobilization. You have to pretend it's not a big deal while also understanding that if you lose, oof, it looks really, really, really bad.
Yeah. So I can tell you this. From what I understand, the Ukrainians, and I'm sure someone's going to write me and say, no, you're wrong. But from what I understand, what I've been told, in Kyiv, they still have Molotov cocktails. A Molotov cocktail is a liquor bottle or a beer bottle. You put gasoline, maybe a gel in there as well, and you put a wick in there. You light that wick on fire. You throw that at a tank. It'll crash against the tank.
I've played Daisy.
Explode
I know
and
Molotov
fire, right? So I'll tell you this: a Molotov cocktail isn't going to do a damn thing to a tank.
Right.
Nothing. And you get people, what do you throw in the engine compartment? Like, well, you're going to be so terrified. Good luck. Best of luck with that. Let me know how it works out. So, I mean, if you do throw it inside a tank, it's going to ruin someone's day. It'll burn out. Like if you throw it on the outside. The people of Kyiv do not want to be slaves, to the point where they still have Molotov cocktails in milk crates at the bus station, at the bus benches, and with instructions up on the bus bench wall how to use them and where to throw them.
Interesting.
These are people who they're going to fight to the last tooth and the last claw.
Right.
Yeah, they will not give in to Russia.
So you would agree kind of with this analysis of basically like the Russian troops have this like very different morale and even mentality in the war, whereas for Ukraine it's literally life or death.
Yeah.
And that's the major difference
that's
in
a big
the
problem.
success.
What are you even fighting for on the Russian side? Like, what do you...
We're your buddies.
Why,
I mean, you're fighting for your buddies, right? Or you're fighting for your paycheck. And also, a lot of guys in Russia, like when they get that draft notice, they go like, it's my duty. I got to go do my duty, just like my grandfather did during the Great Patriotic War. I got to do my duty.
I feel like the feeling there is like if maybe I speak for myself, I don't think so. If we went to war formally with Syria and the U.S. tried to do a draft, I think a lot of people would not be okay with that. I don't want to go to the Middle East to fight another war after Iraq. We're traumatized from that. This is bullshit. I think that if Russia or China somehow made it across the Pacific, was landing on the shores of California and Washington, I think 80% of the population would have a rifle and they'd be ready to go and fight. I think that the motivation to protect your country against a foreign invader versus doing whatever the hell you think is happening as a Russian in another country, I think the motivations to fight, it's not so much, a little bit it impacts the individual soldier, I imagine, but it's not so much that, so much as politically, what can your population endure? Because it seems like, I remember that there were hilarious articles coming out, RT-approved articles, where it's like Zelensky losing support for the war, and his support drops from like 89% to like 87.5%. Ukrainians still really want to fight, whereas Russia has to live in this double world where they have to be so careful, because if it looks like he genuinely needs to mobilize more of the population to go and fight, there's going to be like large-scale revolt. People just aren't going to be hyped to go and fight a war in Ukraine that's now dragged on for almost 2 years. So I think it's the political implications even more so than just the individual soldier motivations to fight, although I'm sure that impacts it a little bit too.